So we have the same theme, so this is very congruent. So hello, my name is Claire Baumgardner, and I will be presenting on my translation capstone project, which was translating the writings of Gabriela Mistral. And my mentor was Professor Maria Estela Jareche. And so first I want to introduce Gabriela Mistral. Was a Chilean poet and writer who was most active in the first half of the 20th century. Gabriela Mistral was a pseudonym. She was born Lucila Godoy Alcayaga in rural Chile in the province of Coquimbo. And I mentioned Coquimbo because it's actually relevant to one of the texts that I chose to translate, that it was her home province. She had a difficult childhood, and her father abandoned her family when she was very young, leading to her to have a very close relationship with her mother, which was also relevant to one of the texts I chose. Early on, she began writing poetry, and she was first published when she was 15 in a local newspaper, and her writing career really expanded from there. And one of the reasons why I gravitated toward translating her was because she is an extremely important figure and writer in Latin American literature, but she is very under-translated, and she has had a major impact on the literature of the world, of course, but also of Latin America, yet she, much of her prose has not been translated, and a lot of her poetry as well. But she actually won the Nobel Prize. She was the first Latin American writer to win the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1945. So not just the first woman, but the first Latin American writer. So I believe she should be more translated. So the text I chose from an anthology of articles, essays and correspondence written by Mistral between 1921 and 1956, and they were published in the Chilean newspaper El Mercurio. The first text I chose is La Vocación de la Madre, which I have a working translation of that title as In Honor of Mothers. And the second text I chose is Una Provincia en Desgracia, which I have translated as A Province in Misery. And I chose these two texts because they're very different, but they are united by her style, which is very literary and very poetic. A lot of her words are she has like a linguistic richness in her language. That was a challenge to translate, and I'll be talking about that a little more. But they were also very personal texts to her. The first one is very explicitly personal, as she's writing to her mother, directly addressing her mother. And the second one is more journalistic in nature, but it's also personal in that she's writing about her home province and a drought that was occurring there. And she also addresses the economic disparity in the region and expresses some of her political views about what should be done. So briefly, the context was important for me to consider in my translation. Who was reading the El Mercurio? It was a very widely read newspaper. Still is. It's still an active newspaper. And also the geography was important. So especially in the second text, she makes a lot of explicit references to various areas within Coquimbo, and I had to learn a little bit about those places and what was there. She talks especially about the mining industry in Coquimbo and its impact on, on the economic issues. And so that was another important aspect. So a little bit about my challenges in translating the language itself. So one of the things that I found really helpful while I was translating was actually the work of Eugene Nida, who is a writer on translation that I encountered last semester in a class I took with Maria Tomoshko at UMass. And Eugene Nida was a theorist and writer on biblical translation, but his book, Toward a Science of Translating, has been a seminal work in translation theory with lots of broader applications beyond translating the Bible. I particularly found his theory on referential and emotive meaning to be very helpful. So for Nida, referential meaning is more like the dictionary definitions of words, and emotive meaning refers to more of the connotations that words can carry and the emotive response that they can provoke in a reader, which is mostly imbued through context and repetition of how those words are used. So not just what those words mean as listed in the dictionary, but how they are actually used in songs, in poems, in language. in popular culture. So one of the ways that I used this was in translating the verb regar. So regar, the most, sorry. So the most commonly accepted definition of regar is to water, as in to water plants. But there's a lot of other meanings, as you can see here. So what I did was I compiled the dictionary meanings, but I knew I needed something more to connect to the emotions of the way that Mistral was using regar in context. So just to briefly show you what this context is, so regar appears in the second sentence, con tu sangre más rica me regabas. And so regar here is the literal translation of that, which with your blood more rich, you watered me. So what I did was I created this web and kind of looked at the meanings of regar, and what I found was that there was kind of this connotation of nourishment. Especially in the meaning to moisten, this is probably the most unusual meaning, to moisten the larval cells within a hive of bees. So regar can refer to the process by which bees feed their babies in the larval cells. And so I found this idea of nourishment and nurturing, and that was what helped me to arrive at my final translation, which was, with your richer blood you nourished me, like the water nourishes the hyacinth seeds hidden beneath the earth. And thank you very much.